Hello and welcome to Hack Your Health. I'm Erica and today I'm going to do a video about 7 reasons why I personally believe it's good to cook with lard. So I came to a bit of an epiphany recently because I've been thinking for years, what's the best thing to cook with? Because you hear so much about how you shouldn't heat things like olive oil to a high temperature, yet canola oil and corn oil and stuff that can be heated higher is really highly processed and filled with chemicals and genetically modified and everything. And I always just felt really confused, like, well, then what can I cook with kind of thing. And like many people, I was raised thinking that lard is bad and it's disgusting, and basically had never even considered cooking with it, basically due to my personal bias and the kind of cultural mentality that we have towards it. But recently, while I was going through this thought process for the umpteenth time, I realized, you know what? I think that the answer that I've been looking for is to cook with lard. And then it was like, that just makes sense. So for the past month or two, I've been cooking with lard instead of using olive oil or coconut oil, which is what I was using before. And I really am very happy with that decision, and I don't see myself going back. So that brings me to my first reason why I think it's a good idea to cook with lard, and that is basically the quality. So one of the first things I noticed when I switched over was, before I use a cast iron frying pan to cook with, and I always, when I washed it, so I would just wash it with steel wool and hot water and then dry it off with paper towel. And when I dry it off, no matter how much I scratched it or whatever, and you don't usually use soap for cast iron because it removes the coating, and whenever I dried it off, there would be black on the paper towel, like quite a lot of black. And it was like I could never wash it off. And I've never felt good about that because it's like, I know it's probably not good for me to be eating this black stuff, and I'm not really sure why that was happening. But yeah, I felt like, basically burned things are fairly carcinogenic, and I felt kind of uneasy about this black stuff coming off. But then when I started cooking with lard, that really stopped happening. There's hardly any black on the paper towel now, and the way I have washed it has really not changed. So that tells me that, this is either preventing the food from burning or it's not burning as much itself. There's something different about the lard that's preventing that buildup of black on my frying pan, and it really eases my mind and makes me feel a lot better knowing that it's more clean in that sense. So that's one of the first things I noticed, is just how clean it is when it cooks. But it creates a much nicer surface to the frying pan, I've noticed, so things really don't stick. It's very easy to cook with, and the flavor is really good. It makes things more crispy when you're frying with it, and generally I just find that it's very good quality, like it makes things turn out really well, and that goes for baking as well. I don't really bake very much, but when people use lard in things like, pie crusts and stuff, it makes it really, really flaky, versus vegetable shortening. It's still good, but it doesn't have that really rich flakiness that is very desirable in pie crust. So basically, I would say that one of the best reasons, maybe the best reason to cook with lard, is just how good it makes the things that you're cooking it in or with. So it's just a very good quality ingredient. And you can also reuse it a lot more than regular oil, or vegetable oil. I mean, like, people kind of cook with lard and leave it in the pan and cook something else in it. And, I haven't done that. Oops, my phone's on. I haven't done that too much because I'm still kind of new to it, but lots of people have told me that they just kind of don't change it, and that's fine because it's a very stable oil, within reason, of course. So that's a good That's my first reason, is just the quality of it. The second reason, which I feel is very important as well, and perhaps has to do with the cleanliness of the pan and the lack of black residue, is the high smoke point. So you can cook with lard up to 380 degrees. That's where it starts to smoke or kind of break down. And when oils, so basically, lard is about half saturated, half unsaturated. And so the saturated fat is stable. It doesn't really break it down with cooking, but the lack of, complete bonds or whatever in unsaturated fat is what makes it unstable. Those start to break down at high temperatures. So that's, it's a relatively stable oil because it has a higher quantity of saturated fat. However, the unsaturated stuff will start to break down, whereas vegetable oils have a lot more unsaturated fat, and especially things like omega-3 will break down very easily at much lower temperatures, so that's why they're really not good for cooking. And things like canola oil and other processed oils have a higher smoke point, but that's because they're very refined, and all the things that are kind of gonna make them unstable are removed during the refining process. And while they're being processed, they're also heated to very high temperatures, and part of them are trans fats. So that's really not healthy. They're also exposed to chemicals. They're grown, generally, a lot of those oils are genetically modified, sprayed with pesticides, etc. So the trade-off for that extra 20 degrees Fahrenheit of cooking stability, I feel, is really not worth it, and they're basically incomparable. Like having a very unrefined, minimally processed product like lard, which your body is easily going to recognize and handle, versus something which is very highly processed and may contain a lot of chemicals in addition to the oil. I feel that's not really, the smoke point may be higher, but it's probably not worth the extra sort of negative qualities of that oil. So among, a higher smoke point than butter, for example, which would be a comparable fat in my opinion. So basically, a good reason to cook with lard is that you can basically take it up to a high temperature without risking it breaking down, and you don't have to deal with the contamination factor that's present in other oils with a high smoke point. A third reason why I feel that lard is a very good choice is because it is a good source of vitamin D. So vegetable oils are simply not a source of vitamin D. They don't contain it. Vitamin D comes from animal sources, essentially. Even supplements are generally made from lanolin, which is excreted by sheep. So it's kind of on sheep's wool, but it's not wool itself. It's an oil. That's where the supplementation of D3 usually comes from. So even that's an animal form. So anyways, pigs make vitamin D like us when they are exposed to sunlight. So in order to get this benefit, you'll have to get lard that's from animals that are raised outdoors, like pasture raised, probably locally farmed pigs, not store-bought lard from factory farmed animals, because that won't have vitamin D because they don't go outside. Also, lard that's from the grocery store is often kind of hydrogenated to make it stable longer. So I would definitely not recommend getting your lard from, big grocery store brand off the shelf. I would recommend getting it from a local butcher. That's what I'm talking about in this video, is like good quality lard. So yeah, vitamin D is really important hormone. It helps with the absorption of calcium. Vitamin D deficiency is very highly associated with a lot of diseases, including autoimmune diseases and things like MS, etc. So getting enough vitamin D is very important. It's also important for your mood. It can help prevent seasonal affective disorder and anxiety. And vitamin D basically is very necessary for your body and your mind to be in good health. And about 75% of Americans are vitamin D deficient. And I don't know the statistics for Canada, but it's probably more because we're further north, so we just have basically no sunlight for a lot of the year. And other, European countries too, places that are in the north are especially vitamin D deficient, but also since so many people work indoors and they don't really go outside in the sun, even when they live in a sunny place, they're still vitamin D deficient because they're not exposed to the sunlight. So it's a very common deficiency, and lard is a really great way to get more vitamin D. It depends on the quality of the lard and the exposure of the animals to sunlight, but when they are exposed to sunlight, it's ranked second after cod liver oil as the highest vitamin D source in food, up to 100 international units per tablespoon. And you only need, I forget, but I think it's like either 2,000 or 4,000 or so IUs of vitamin D per day, and that really also varies on what source you look at. People have different ideas of how much vitamin D you need, but basically a very significant amount can be found in pasture-raised lard. And I feel that if you incorporate something into your diet on a daily basis that's a source of something like vitamin D, that's a really good way to kind of keep your baseline at a reasonable level and prevent that deficiency. So just by simply cooking with it, since you cook often, probably, or I do, it's just going to kind of keep that constant source in your diet. It's not to say that it needs to be or should be the only source of vitamin D, but it would really be a great boost to keep that kind of baseline level. The vitamin D is also much more bioavailable when eaten with saturated fat. So I have been taking these vitamin D drops that are in like olive oil, and I start to wonder, like, how much am I really getting out of this when it's in olive oil? Like, is that enough? Whereas if you're eating it with your meal in a natural form with the saturated fat that makes it absorbable, I feel like not only is it a good natural source, but it's also more easily absorbed by your body. Another great reason to cook with lard is that it's affordable. So if you look at something that's a comparable high quality fat, that would probably be grass-fed butter, would be somewhat comparable. And grass-fed butter for like 1 cup, 250 grams or whatever, is like $10, at least where I live, which is quite expensive. Whereas I got this very large bag of lard, which is probably 5 times as much, for $15. So it's a lot cheaper. And this, doesn't look too pretty because I've been using it for a couple of months already, but it's gonna take me a long time to go through that. I also bought this little thing of lard, which was already seasoned with parsley and with an onion, and this half. I already used half of it, and that was only $2 at like the local butcher. But I actually would not recommend buying that because I find that it burns more easily because of the parsley and the onion pieces, and it's not very versatile. Whereas the pork fat, I can add flavors like that if I want to, but I don't have to kind of avoid burning the seasoning. So I would recommend just getting it plain. And they told me at the butcher to put this bag in the freezer because then it will keep a very long time. Like they said, like one of the employees there has had it for like 2 years in his freezer and it's still going good. And then put it in the fridge overnight when I needed access to it, and then take a ice cube tray and fill each part of the ice cube tray with the fat and put it back in the freezer, and then just use it like that, because then basically it makes it easy to get a small amount instead of having to chip the frozen lard. So that's something that you might want to try if you're buying it in a large quantity, is putting it in an ice cube tray and freezing it, and then it will keep for a long time. So I am a big believer in like being healthy without spending millions of dollars, and to make it possible for people who are on a limited budget to eat healthy and be healthy, because I mean, that's very important for everyone, no matter who you are. And so I think that lard, locally sourced and organic, is still really cheap. So it's this really high quality source of fat that is accessible to everyone. So I feel like that's a really great reason to cook with it as well. So the fifth reason that I feel it's great to cook with lard is that it's environmentally friendly. So this lard that I bought is just from a farm. It's probably 100 kilometers or so away. And I live in the cities, so if you lived out in the country, you could probably get one from like down the road. There's probably someone that raises pigs very close to you. And pigs can eat pretty much anything. They can forage for themselves. They can eat food scraps. They can pretty much eat whatever. They're omnivores. Sort of like humans in a way, where we can eat pretty much whatever's around. Something similar like that. So it doesn't require a huge amount of energy for one thing to transport the lard, unlike something like coconut oil, which is sort of a comparable fat as well for cooking and stuff, because it goes also to a high temperature, also somewhat saturated. That is not locally available in northern places at all. It needs to be flown in. It's, needing to come by plane or by boat. That burns a lot of fossil fuels. So the amount of energy required to get something like coconut oil to market versus lard to market is extremely different. The lard, it's available pretty much everywhere, because pigs are raised in most places, and it doesn't require much processing. So if you want to compare it to something like canola oil, which has to go be refined at a plant, needs to be using chemicals, and they spray the crops with pesticides, and there's a lot of chemical and industrial processes that go into making it. So all of that has an impact on the environment, of course. Plus it needs to be transported more than once to be refined and then packaged and then brought to market, versus something that's just done at the farm, maybe goes to a slaughterhouse and then is, rendered at the butcher or whatever. It's a lot shorter transportation. So I would just consider it a more environmentally friendly choice. And pigs, if they're responsibly raised, are generally foraging for themselves. You don't need to really grow a huge amount of food in order to raise pigs, because they'll just dig around and eat grubs or whatever. And then a lot of people will feed them basically things like food scraps, or so even though of course they need to eat, it's not necessarily that they need to, and they need to be fed, but it's not the case that they need to be fed really high energy crops. They can be fed a very wide variety of things and can partially fend for themselves. And having animals live off the land like that, foraging and stuff, it's good for the soil, and it's good for basically fertilizing the earth. And it's really it's painted in a really bad way a lot of the time, raising animals, but actually the earth needs animals living on it in order to be kind of fertile and everything. So I feel that if pigs are responsibly raised and you're getting them locally, that's a really good choice. And it also supports local food security. So if anything ever goes wrong with the transportation system, you'll be really happy that you supported people that are raising animals close by, and you have still that source of food to connect to. And it supports the local economy as well. So it's just a more sustainable choice, I feel. The sixth reason is also it's good for hormone health. So the vitamin D and the cholesterol is really going to support your body with your mood, or regulating your reproductive system, or whatever your body needs. Cholesterol is a very healing substance in the body, and it's actually a good thing to have a source of it in your diet. So I would just say that, this is a good food just to kind of keep your hormonal system regulated. And I am not a super hormone expert, so I'm just kind of leaving it at that. But that's a great food for basically supporting those systems in your body. The seventh reason is more of a personal kind of opinion reason, or what's important to me, which is choosing foods that are good for healing or reducing inflammation. So as you may know from previous videos, I've had a couple of autoimmune diseases, and I really try to focus on eating foods that aren't going to trigger a immune response. And by that I mean, for one thing, I try to eat foods that don't contain a lot of sugar or starch most of the time. And eating saturated fat is very satisfying and gives your body a source of energy that doesn't require carbohydrates. So that's really good for people with autoimmune diseases. Very easily digestible and good source of energy. Sorry, my battery died. So what I mean by not triggering an immune response is basically that it doesn't contain a lot of chemicals, and it's in a natural form that your body can recognize. And I feel that lard, because it's an animal fat, something that ancestrally we would have eaten. People have been hunting and eating animals and cooking meat and eating fat for a very, very long time. So it's recognizable by your body. It's molecules that are similar to human molecules and can be easily kind of converted. And it's, in my opinion, it makes sense that it's unlikely to trigger an immune response because it's something clean in the sense that it doesn't have a lot of chemicals in it. It's just fat. And also it's just something that your body can easily handle. Whereas a lot of, vegetable oils are very highly processed, and they are far from their natural form because they're refined, deodorized, bleached, etc. And they're also grown with pesticides and chemical fertilizers, genetically modified, and then they're treated with hexane and other chemicals during their processing. So some of them are trans fats by the time they get to you because of how many times they've been heated to high temperatures. So basically, it seems to me like that's far more likely to trigger your immune system. There's, in my opinion, a lot more things in there that your body could be like, oh, what's that, right? And then start to overreact. So in my opinion, for people who are healing from autoimmune diseases or trying to reduce the inflammation in their body, lard would be a really good choice because nutritionally it's supportive. It has the vitamin D, the cholesterol, the fat, the calories that are going to be needed to heal and to be healthy. But it also does not contain the chemicals and the refined foods that potentially in a person with a very overactive immune system could be triggering and prevent that calming. So personally, I feel that it's best to eat really natural foods that your body is going to just accept, especially when you're healing, versus things that are very unnatural and highly processed and contain chemicals, etc., because that's probably going to keep that cycle of overreaction happening. And I'm not a doctor. This is not medical advice. This is just a mindset that really was helpful to me when I was healing. And of course, I still kind of am healing because I had more recently the alopecia episode, etc. So I'm not perfect. I'm not. But I'm just saying that this is the kind of thought process that has really been helpful to me when choosing foods. And when I apply it to lard versus vegetable oil, I can really see that lard, when you think about it, I feel is a lot less likely to trigger any kind of immune response. So I know that, a lot of people watching my channel have digestive problems, and I feel that lard would be a really good choice. And this is just meant to help you in your research. Always do what seems right to you, and see how you feel when you're eating certain foods. And I'd be really happy to hear from you about if you started cooking with lard, or how you feel, or any questions or comments or suggestions, etc. And if you have any topics that you'd like me to do a video on, also please let me know. And thank you so much for watching, and all the best on your healing journey. Okay, bye.